The clock on the wall of the suburban kitchen didn't just tick. It echoed like a metronome in an empty cathedral. It was 3:14 a.m. In the center of the room stood a man whose breathing was the only uneven thing in the entire house. At his feet lay a heavy, dark secret wrapped in industrial plastic. He looked at his hands shaking, but gloved. He looked at the floor bleached until it shined with a chemical brilliance. He had spent 6 hours scrubbing away a life, dismantling a digital footprint, and incinerating every physical link to the horror that had just transpired. He leaned against the counter, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He was a man of logic, a man of systems. He believed that if you remove the variables, the equation disappears. He truly believed he had erased everything. But as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, he didn't know that the very air he breathed held the ghost of his victim, and that the one thing he forgot would be the one thing that would scream his name from the shadows. Willow Creek was the kind of town where silence was a currency. The lawns were manicured with surgical precision, and the secrets were buried deeper than the irrigation lines. Thomas Miller fit perfectly into this landscape. A high-level systems analyst, Thomas lived in a world of code, binary logic, and if-then statements. To his neighbors, he was the quiet widower who returned library books on time. To his coworkers, he was the genius who could find a glitch in 10,000 lines of data within minutes. He was a man of order. But beneath the pressed shirts and the calculated pauses in conversation lay a terrifying obsession with control. The victim, Elena Vance, was the antithesis of Thomas's cold world. A 28-year-old freelance journalist with a spirit that couldn't be caged, she had moved into the apartment complex Thomas managed. She was vibrant, messy, and investigative by nature. She was working on a story about local land zoning frauds, a project that led her to look into the very records Thomas had been quietly manipulating for years to line his pockets. Elena didn't know she was walking into a trap. She thought she was just following a lead. On the night of October 14th, the air was thick with the scent of coming rain. Thomas had invited Elena to his home under the guise of providing archived documents that would prove her theory. The atmosphere was deceptively calm. He served tea. They talked about the weather. But as Elena leaned over the desk to examine a file, the order of the room shifted. Thomas didn't use a gun too loud, too much ballistic evidence. He used his hands and a length of nylon cord. The struggle was brief but violent, a chaotic interruption in his otherwise sterile existence. Once the life had left her eyes, Thomas began his true work. He was a master of the clean. He didn't just wipe the surfaces. He dismantled the plumbing to ensure no DNA was trapped in the U-bend of the sink. He used a luminol neutralizing agent he'd researched for months on the dark web. He took her phone, disassembled it, and drove 40 miles in 3 different directions to discard the pieces in moving garbage trucks. He even went as far as to log into her social media accounts from a spoofed IP address to send a message to her mother, found a lead in the mountains, going off-grid for a few days. Love you. He was a ghost in the machine. He drove her car to a high-crime neighborhood, left the keys in the ignition, and wiped every surface with a professional-grade degreaser. When the police finally arrived at his door 3 days later, they didn't find a murderer. They found a concerned neighbor. Lead Detective Marcus Thorne, a man who had spent 20 years smelling lies, felt something was off, but the house was too clean. It smelled of nothing but lemon and ozone. There were no bloodstains, no signs of a struggle, and the digital trail showed Elena leaving the city voluntarily. Thomas played the role of the helpful witness perfectly, providing logs and security footage from the apartment complex footage he had carefully edited to show a woman of Elena's build walking out of the side exit an hour after she had actually been murdered. He had accounted for the gait, the clothing, even the way she tilted her head. But Thomas, for all his genius, made a fundamental error in his calculations of human nature. He believed that evidence was only what you could see, touch, or track digitally. He didn't realize that the world is a series of overlapping shadows. While he was busy neutralizing the chemical traces of blood, he didn't notice the microscopic fibers from a rare, vintage Persian rug he had burned in his fireplace. Those fibers had clung to his ventilation system. He didn't realize that the spoofed IP address had a millisecond of latency that pinged a local tower he hadn't accounted for. To understand the depths of his arrogance, we must look at the weeks following the disappearance. Thomas didn't go into hiding. He stayed in the light. He attended community meetings. He even helped the search parties, walking through the woods with a flashlight, pretending to look for the woman he had already dissolved from existence. He watched the investigators like a scientist watches a lab rat. He took notes on their patterns, their questions, and their frustrations. He was obsessed with the idea of the perfect crime. He spent hours on online forums reading about cold cases and the mistakes made by lesser men. He felt superior. He felt like a god among mortals who were trapped by their emotions and their sloppy habits. However, Detective Thorne was not a man of logic alone. He was a man of intuition. He began to look into Thomas's history, finding a trail of missing variables that dated back 15 years. A college girlfriend who vanished. A former business partner who left the state overnight. There was no evidence, just a pattern of absence. Thorne realized that Thomas didn't just kill people. He deleted them. The investigation took a turn when Thorne decided to stop looking for what was there and started looking for what was missing. He noticed that in the week following Elena's disappearance, Thomas's electricity and water usage had spiked to levels 3 times higher than his average. The man who was a minimalist, a man who saved every penny, was suddenly running a high-intensity cleaning operation. Thorne obtained a warrant for the smart meter data, a digital footprint Thomas had overlooked in his focus on the more obvious traces. Then came the forensic breakthrough. While Thomas had neutralized the blood, he couldn't neutralize the biology of fear. When a body is under extreme stress, it releases specific chemical markers through sweat and breath. These markers can linger in porous materials like drywall and insulation for weeks. The forensics team brought in a specialized electronic nose, a device designed to detect trace amounts of specific volatile organic compounds. In the corner of the office where Elena died, the sensors went off. It wasn't blood. It was the chemical signature of a human being in a state of sheer terror. Thomas had cleaned the physical, but he couldn't clean the atmospheric. The air itself was a witness. As the walls began to close in, Thomas's composure didn't crack. It hardened. He began to preemptively sue the police department for harassment, using his knowledge of the legal system to delay the search of his primary residence. This gave him time to perform what he called the final audit. He began to replace the drywall in his office, claiming a water leak. He replaced the vents. He even painted the entire interior of the house with a specialized sealant. He was literally burying the crime scene under layers of new material. But Thorne was one step ahead. He had placed a covert surveillance team on the house. They didn't watch for him leaving. They watched what he threw away. In a pile of construction debris, they found a single, scorched fragment of a microcassette. It was the piece Thomas thought had been destroyed in the incinerator, but a fluke of the airflow had pushed it into a cold spot in the fire. This fragment didn't have the murder on it, but it had something just as damning. The sound of a heavy plastic roll being unfurled, the sound of preparation. It proved premeditation. When the police finally broke down his door for the last time, Thomas was sitting at his dining table, eating a perfectly prepared meal. He didn't run, he didn't fight. He looked at Thorne and said, "You found a lot of noise, detective. But you haven't found a single line of code that connects me to a crime." He was wrong. The noise was the evidence. The jury didn't need a DNA match or a murder weapon when they were presented with the overwhelming evidence of a man who had tried too hard to be invisible. They saw the water bills. They saw the atmospheric reports. They heard the sound of the plastic. And then, the final blow, the recovery of Elena's body from the ravine. In her clutched hand, hidden under her fingernail, was a tiny, microscopic piece of blue nylon cordocord that matched a spool found in the back of Thomas's meticulously organized garage. He had cleaned the room, but he hadn't cleaned the victim well enough. The man who lived by logic was destroyed by the one thing logic cannot account for, the desperate final act of a woman fighting for her life. Elena Vance didn't just leave a story. She left a trap for her killer. Thomas Miller now sits in a cell, a space even more controlled than the home he once kept. He spends his days calculating the odds of an appeal, still trying to find the glitch in the system that failed him. But the system didn't fail. It worked exactly as intended. It looked for the truth, and the truth is something that cannot be deleted. The silence of Willow Creek has been replaced by the echoes of this case, a reminder that no matter how much bleach you use, the stains of a guilty conscience never truly fade. The story of Thomas Miller serves as a chilling testament to the fact that the most dangerous weapon is not a knife or a gun, but a mind that believes it is above the law. What do you think was the fatal flaw in Thomas's plan? Was it the technology he overlooked, or the arrogance that blinded him to his own humanity? Did he truly believe he could outsmart the very fabric of reality, or was he secretly hoping to be caught? Does a person like Thomas ever truly feel guilt, or is their only regret getting caught? Let us know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into the darkest corners of the human mind and the meticulous world of true crime forensics, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Midnight Crime Vault for more chilling stories of justice and the shadows that hide it. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a descent into the vault. We have many more stories to tell, and your support helps us bring these mysteries to light. Stay safe, stay observant, and remember, the perfect crime is the one you never hear about, but the truth always finds a way to the surface. Until next time, stay in the light.